The U.S. government is fighting to return Julian Assange to the States so he can face federal espionage charges. Today is day one of an appeal hearing in a British court. A grand jury indicted the WikiLeaks founder for helping former U.S. Army soldier Chelsea Manning steal files about Afghanistan and the wars in Iraq, and then publishing them. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse in London today in support of Assange. His lawyers say he was acting as a journalist and his actions are protected by the First Amendment. For more on this, I want to bring in Trevor Timm. He is the co-founder and executive director of the Freedom of the Press Foundation. And I also want to bring in Scott Anderson. He is a visiting fellow at the Brookings Institute and a former attorney advisor for the U.S. State Department. So thank you both for being with us. We really, really appreciate it for a fascinating discussion. Scott, I want to start with you. You've worked for the U.S. government. Why is the Biden administration continuing in its fight to take Assange into custody and to make him face those espionage charges? What do you make of the case that the United States is bringing?
Yeah, the case around the WikiLeaks information that this is focused on is around the Chelsea Manning release that occurred in 2010, 2011, which involved the release of large tranches of U.S. government documents, including State Department cables, military records, lots of other records. These were procured by Chelsea Manning in part, according to the indictment the U.S. government has filed, in coordination with Assange, that provided technical assistance, provided advice, encouragement, along with other members of WikiLeaks, and then released the information publicly in large tranches of data that was not redacted, that all involved the release of names of sources and other sensitive information that negatively impacted third parties, as well as negatively impacting the United States' interests and relationships with those third parties. They focused on these aspects of Assange's conduct in an effort to distinguish what he did from what many other journalists do. I think it's a tricky question as to whether they've succeeded in doing that. And that's something that, if and when this goes to trial in the United States, is going to be a real focus of the proceedings there. But they focused on those aspects of the conduct. Of course, Assange also is believed to be involved in 2016 elections hacking, other matters relating to CIA hacking tools that's come out through WikiLeaks, lots of other matters of U.S. government interest. Those aren't brought into this particular indictment. However, this focuses on the Chelsea Manning leak.
So, Trevor, you heard the case against Julian Assange that the publishing of these leaked documents amounted to a crime because they put, lives in danger. Your organization is one of several groups calling for the Biden administration to drop this case. Why is that?
Yes, absolutely. And thanks for having me. I think it's important for everybody to read the indictment and not just the Justice Department press release. The Justice Department is claiming that Julian Assange is not a journalist, when actually, in fact, it doesn't really matter whether we consider him a journalist or not. What's described in the indictment under the 17 counts of Espionage Act violations is essentially what journalists do all the time. What Julian Assange is accused of is essentially talking to a source over encrypted channels, over asking for more information, for receiving classified information, and then publishing it. And what I think some people don't realize is that journalists at the New York Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, even CBS, regularly engage in this conduct when communicating with sources, when publishing stories in the public interest. And now Julian Assange is obviously unpopular in many political circles, but what is described in the indictment is largely what journalists do all the time, and what the government can essentially do, whether it's the Biden administration or a Trump administration or any other administration that follows this one, is use this precedent against journalists that they don't like. We saw in the previous administration, the president, talking openly about how he wishes that he could throw journalists in jail. Well, if Julian Assange gets prosecuted and convicted, this is a perfect way for a future president to do so.
So, in a lower court in England, they refused to allow Assange's extradition to the U.S. because of his mental health. The judge ruled he would likely kill himself because of the harsh conditions of a U.S. prison. Now, Assange's partners came to court today and spoke about how he is doing. I want to play a bit of what she said.
I'm very concerned for Julian's health. I saw him on Saturday. He's very thin. And I hope that the courts will end this nightmare that Julian is able to come home soon and that wise heads prevail.
Now, that same judge who said Assange's mental health was fragile rejected his lawyer's argument that the U.S. Charges were politically motivated, and she said she believed that Assange would receive a fair trial in the U.S. So, Trevor, what do you make of that decision?
Well, ultimately, I'm glad that the district court decided not to extradite Assange, because I believe this is a clear and present danger to the rights of all journalists. It was disappointing that she kind of put aside the press freedom arguments and didn't properly consider them. If Julian Assange is extradited to the U.S., the prosecution does face a significant hurdle, which is the First Amendment. As we were talking about, newspapers like the Washington Post and the New York Times publish information all the time that the government considers classified, including publishing a lot of information that actually WikiLeaks shared with them directly. But the danger of bringing him here and facing that trial, I think, is a very significant one. Even if he's not convicted, I think journalists can be chilled from even engaging in reporting around national security. And that's why, we had a letter that went to the Justice Department last week that was signed by virtually every major civil liberties organization, press freedom organization, and even human rights organization. So Committee to Protect Journalists, the ACLU, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, all agree, even though they have varying opinions on Assange himself, that this trial or this case is a direct threat to press freedom and that the Biden administration should drop it.
Let me ask you a question, though, Trevor. What Julian Assange and WikiLeaks did is, provide this information for the general public, including members of the media. And, you make the comparison with, the New York Times or the Washington Post. But don't journalists also sort of add to the information? Don't they provide context? Don't they double check the accuracy of the data? Don't they do sort of all these other things that WikiLeaks really didn't do? Is it fair to say what WikiLeaks is akin to what a New York Times journalist would do?
Well, the New York Times actually directly published a lot of the cables that WikiLeaks published. The New York Times, the WikiLeaks was actually at the time working directly with the New York Times on a lot of the stories that the New York Times was doing. And, what the government is arguing is not that Julian Assange didn't provide context or enough context or didn't check the accuracy, though no one is alleging that anything that they published in the Chelsea Manning archive was inaccurate. What they're essentially alleging is that Julian Assange was communicating with Manning, that Julian Assange was asking for more documents, encouraging Chelsea to hand more over, receiving those documents, and then publishing them. So no matter whether you think Julian Assange was a journalist or not, he was engaging in activities that journalists do all the time. The First Amendment doesn't necessarily protect a class of journalists. It protects everybody who is potentially engaged in the act of journalism. And I think that's where the real worry is.
So, Scott, what do you make of the United States promising to allow Assange to serve a sentence on the U.S. charges in his home country of Australia? Is that the government making a concession to try and get Assange to waive extradition?
Not to waive extradition, but to build the case to say that the conditions that the trial judge or the district judge, that previously held up extradition on mental health grounds, to say these conditions have changed. Here's a set of assurances that will ensure that Assange will be confined and tried in conditions in which those mental health concerns will be mitigated. So not only would he have the opportunity to transfer to Australia, that they would also be holding him not in extreme conditions, special administrative measures, where he would be in an extended isolation period, at least barring any further offense by him. They also guaranteed access to health resources, and essentially said he would not be held in the Supermax facility, which is kind of the maximum security U.S. facility. These are all assurances in an effort to make the case that we can mitigate and address these circumstances that you think pose a mental health threat to Assange and still bring him over to try him here. Again, it's in dialogue with the grounds on which the district court actually held up the extradition. The district court did not find any other barriers to extradition from the legal grounds. A lot of these legal issues that Trevor is raising and that I've raised are things relating to the U.S. constitutional law. That's not really an issue before the UK court at this point. Instead, right now, we're really talking about these conditions of detention, and all these assurances are aimed at lifting the concerns there.
So we had a reporter from Yahoo News on the stream about a month ago. After the outlet broke the story that the CIA under the Trump administration actually discussed assassinating Assange. They considered it. Scott, could that have an effect on the U.S.'s case?
It certainly could, but I think you need to look really closely at that story to see how much of an effect it's likely to be. The story itself is actually quite skeptical and reflects the fact that people within the U.S. government were quite skeptical of the proposal that anyone should try and assassinate Julian Assange or other WikiLeaks people, or really forcibly remove them or transfer them. It, in various points, cites senior officials, Trump administration officials, intelligence community officials as saying, we think that would be illegal and that we think that that is something that would be ill-advised and was not seriously considered in any meaningful way, even though there were senior people in the Trump administration that appeared to have asked for information on those possible options. It's problematic that those officials did that. They should have known that was out of line in the first place. It reflects a lot of the problems with some of the senior level decision-making during the Trump administration around certain issues. But the major point of the story is that those ideas did not clearly go anywhere, and that there were people within the government who clarified that they were illegal. There are reasons they shouldn't go anywhere, both on policy and legal grounds. And I think that's likely to mitigate a lot of the impact the story is going to have on the factors that the court's weighing today.
Hey, I'm really glad we had both of you guys here. Trevor Timm and Scott Anderson, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.